Eli Somer, you've been the president of the Ph.D. Now for 2 years. Can you tell me about your background and how you came into this field of dissociation?
I'm a clinical psychologist. In Israel there are three basic ranks of psychologists. A regular psychologist, and then once you finish up your training and in the specialty field and get tested, you become clinical psychologist. So, and there is also a senior clinical psychologist, which is a psychologist that can train others. So I'm a senior clinical psychologist in Israel. I've been working in the trauma field since the mid-80s, I think, when I did my doctoral work. And frankly, my acquaintance with the dissociative disorder field has been almost coincidental. Simply speaking, a patient walked into my office, and she was disorganized DAD in the sense that her parts were chaotic, and her switching was evident even in the intake. So even somebody who had no idea about dissociative disorder could clearly identify that something odd is going on. And at that time I was active in the hypnosis field, and I got training in hypnosis. And I was in the United States at the time, and I quickly went to consult with a very senior hypnotist. Erika Braun was her name, in Chicago, and she understood. I mean, the mid-80s was, I think, when the ISSTD was first established, and so the field was not very developed. But she understood what was going on and was coaching me in my first steps as a therapist of dissociative disorders. But since then, I've accumulated, various degrees of experience in the trauma field. Both first-hand experience. I'm a former tank commander, and I participated in war, and so I know about trauma, also as a citizen, being subjected to shellings and bombings and terrorism and stuff like that. But I started my training in the 80s. I was already a psychologist, so I was motivated through my lifestyle, and also being a first son of Holocaust survivors. Somehow the theme of trauma was very much part of my identity and context. So throughout the years, I've gained a lot of experience also in type 1 trauma associated with war and so on. But this knowledge was very handy, of course, in dealing with the outcome of rape, which is also type 1 trauma, single trauma. So I can say that practically I've dedicated my career, my professional life to the research and treatment and advocacy on behalf of survivors of abuse and sexual trauma.
And being from this side of the Atlantic, there's not been, in the last maybe 80s, 90s, there wasn't too much focus on dissociation here. It was more like an American phenomenon, has been for some years. So how has it been for you? This some maybe joking about this being just an American phenomenon. I know you worked with this.
Right. Well, many of us in the field have been and still are sometimes on the defensive, trying to defend the legitimacy and the validity of the concepts that we're working with and that we see every day in the clinic. So this has been, of course, also my experience. And one of the criticisms voiced at me and others has been that this is, as you said, primarily a North American phenomenon, with some pockets in the Netherlands. And one of the criticism was, okay, how do you explain that we veteran clinicians in Israel who've been in the field for 30 years, haven't diagnosed one DAD, and you in your clinic you have 5 or 6. What does it say about the validity of the concept? So it got me interested in issues of cross-cultural or culture-bound dissociation, to indeed try to investigate the challenge that indeed whether or not this is indeed a North American or a Western phenomenon. And all you need to do is, you don't need to get out of your couch and become or chair and become an anthropologist. I mean, but it's enough that you start reading anthropological literature to find out that among the hundreds of traditional societies in the world, there's almost no one that doesn't have issues associated with entities that are not non-me entities, possess the body and create a situation in which the person possessed feels out of control. So these issues of possession, for example, and people can in the various cultures report that they are they get into trance, sometimes spontaneous trance. But often in other cultures, the trance is associated with some kind of an entity without a body, a spirit, or a demon, or an angel, or a deity, a god, that gets access into the body. I mean, it depends on the culture, on the ethos, on the euphemisms of the culture. Each culture is different, but the same phenomena we can observe in many, many cultures. It is also interesting to observe that cultures that are characterized by these kind of phenomena are, to a great extent, cultures in which women are being oppressed. They serve in very traditional roles, are discouraged from getting education, and are sometimes frequently abused, oppressed and abused. So it is these women, a lot of these women, that present with these possession states. It's also interesting to observe that in many of these situations, not only are the possessed being female, but in many cases, if not in most cases, the possessing agent is male. And interestingly enough, also a very common point of entry into the body is the vagina or the rectum, from which the male possessing agent enters the body. Another thing that is interesting is that a lot of these women, when they are possessed, they are recognized by the community as not being responsible for what they're saying and what they're doing. And this allows them, these women that are typically oppressed and silenced, to be very vocal, to be very aggressive, and sometimes to display sexual behavior. Like they would start dancing, and some of the clothes will come off, and they curse, they say, nasty words that are not accepted in the community. So I have a hunch that sociologically and psychologically, this is working well, in the sense that it allows the women, it gives them permission to, and an outlet to express perhaps suppressed emotions of anger and sexuality without telling the story. We usually don't tell any story of trauma, but we know that this is a potentially traumatized sector of the population, and the male patriarchal establishment also wins. Everybody wins, because usually those called upon to exorcise these possessing agents are the religious establishment, and they are exclusively male. So the men get to show that they are connected to God and they are the upper class, and they also get to be the effective agents who sort of drive away the forces of evil. So the men are happy about it in these traditional societies. And there is often a ceremony of cure, which is also interesting for us as clinicians, because the cure in these settings is not integrationalist, like we are in our strategy, striving towards integration, but the cure is exorcist, to drive. And so it's intriguing to wonder, how does it work? Because it has been there for many decades, many centuries. So of course one cannot rule out that perhaps there are such things as demons and spirits, and it's outside the field of our expertise. But it's, what I can clearly say is that it works in that it allows for some catharsis. The women get a chance to unload, to express, to be very physical. Many of these ceremonies are conducted through dance. An orchestra with drums, for example, is being brought in, like in North Africa and in Africa. Sometimes the family sits around, so the atmosphere is one of support. But through the drumming, sometimes there's also another female that helps the exorcist, that she dances and encourages the patient to dance with her. So the patient is put into trance through movement, kinesthetic induction of trance through movement. She gets into some of ecstasy, screaming and so on, and then she collapses. I've seen many of these ceremonies on video, and some I attended myself, and also interviewed people in Israel from a North African extraction, so I know something about it. And then they fall down exhausted, and report of calmness, and this is effective at least for a while. So another difference is that this is a one-session therapy. Not a word is uttered, so the males are not to blame for anything, the men. This is why it works. And it achieves some sense of relief. But these phenomena of possession, of people acting and not feeling they are in control, and also sometimes being amnestic, having dissociative amnesia about the event, is out there in hundreds of societies in the world.
Have you done research or research that supports the idea that this phenomena you talk about really are dissociation, what we can call dissociation? Because that is interesting thoughts you have, but do we have research that back up these thoughts?
Well, no, but it's a beginning. The anthropological data points out that there is something that is worth looking at. The DSM has also recognized that these are culture-bound phenomena, and sometimes they fit within the culture, but sometimes these phenomena cause distress because the possessing agents do not leave the body and whatever. So the American Psychological Society, and I think also the ICD, the European World Health Organization, has included these issues often in a non-otherwise specified kind of category. So the mainstream of mental health is acknowledging that there is such a thing, but I'm always amused that the DSM is to me it appears sort of colonial in many ways, because it represents a small fraction of the world population, the Western population. The vast majority of humanity doesn't live in Europe and in North America. It lives in South America, in Africa, and in Asia. This is where the majority, and the DSM does not apply to them. The phenomena that occur in most humanity is classified in the DSM as non-otherwise specified. But there's a lot to be learned from these phenomena out there, and I am absolutely confident that these the variations on the experience of something is operating from within me and I'm not in control of it, is a universal phenomena. There's no doubt about it. It's documented not in psychological literature so much as in anthropological literature. And we need to create a dialogue between the disciplines to learn more about it.
And as much you have been talking about these women mostly here is not believed or not seen for what they really have been. Mostly they have been exposed to. You have much of the same thing happens in court, where they're not believed or their experiences are mystified. And I know you have been this has also been your interest.
Yes, has become my interest because I have been invited on several occasions by the prosecution primarily, to interpret to the courts behaviors of victims of abuse and trauma that raise skepticism and can raise skepticism in the court. Now, some of the behaviors of our clients are inconsistent with, I would say, the lay person's common sense. The lay person's common sense, for example, which the judges have, for example, they are not experts in mental health, would not be able to explain, for example, why a woman that has been attacked would just passively cooperate and then later, much later perhaps, call it a rape. Legally, it is very difficult to identify a sexual behavior of a man towards a woman as a rape if it has not been refused. So it's a serious question there legally, but what the court does not understand, that if this woman, for example, has been violently or forcibly subjected to oppression by that person, because, for example, he is a very violent person or a person in authority, that it is possible that such a woman would, for example, freeze. And that the freezing response is very normal, very common also in the animal kingdom. So sometimes psychologists, like myself and like perhaps many of the viewers, need to come to the courts and to interpret to the judges some of the behaviors that we are very familiar with. For example, peri-traumatic dissociation. That's one example. Another example that is often an issue of conflict in the court is associated with delayed recall. The defense often raises the question of how is it possible that a person goes through a war or is being raped and is flooded by intrusive memories, and in turn somebody who has been raped dozens of times as a child would forget that, as if it were a meaningless episode, and suddenly recall it after 20 years. So to the mind of the layperson, this is unreasonable. And as you are well aware of, all the defense needs to do is to insert some doubt in the minds of the judge, and the judge must acquit. So the prosecution sometimes is concerned about it. You know, they believe they have some evidence to show that the testimony of the victim is credible, but they must explain to the court how does dissociative amnesia work, and is it a real phenomena, and can memories that were suppressed for 20 years and emerge after such a long time, can they be believed? Are they credible memories? And I would conclude by saying just one thing as an illustration to this. Somehow the court does not have any problem, at least in my country, in Israel, where I come from, in understanding PTSD. and they don't have any problem in understanding the phenomena of amnesia in PTSD. So I often invoke in the court the notion of PTSD with delayed onset, which is a phenomena that people understand. In Israel recently there's been a movie, Waltz with Bashir, which is it got some prizes in Europe too. It's an illustrated, an animated documentary about the experience of a soldier who fought in the war in Lebanon and sort of witnessed the massacre in one of the refugee camps, and he forgot about it. And the whole movie is about reconstructing his memory. So when it relates to men, somehow, at least in societies like where I come from, there's no problem in believing in delayed recall and post-traumatic amnesia. So sometimes I need to invoke these facts that are common knowledge to help the judges understand that it can also happen to children, that traumatic memory is compartmentalized, and later on when the conditions are ripe and they feel safer, they can recall it even decades later. So there's a lot that we could do as clinicians, not only helping the clients directly in therapy. Sometimes some of them want to seek their day of justice in court, but then often experts are needed to go there and to interpret these unusual phenomena to the judges so justice can be made.
Now the information and knowledge we have about dissociation has to reach court and lawyers also.
Absolutely, and in my country we try to provide through the rape crisis centers training for the prosecutions, for the judges. But a lot of our work is done in providing testimony, professional expert testimonies in court. And once the judge rules and the verdict is somehow based on the expert testimony, it becomes something that is then quoted again and again in future trials. You don't need to prove it again and again, because a ruling in many legal systems sets a precedence, and then it becomes something that is accepted. So that's another important area where some of us can be helpful in sort of assisting the victims of violence and sexual violence, seeking their day of justice in the court. And in many cases this also helps them in their recovery.
Okay, so then I just want to say thank you for doing this interview, and also for doing 2 years of being president of the ESTD.
My pleasure.
That is finished today.
Yes.
You're past president from today on. So thank you.
Thank you, Arne. Thank you very much.